All right. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. Thrilled to be with you back in 2025. We've had a short break, actually a pretty long break from the reading group. And so it's good to see you all again. A couple of quick notes and reminders. We're in the middle of reading Between Past and Future, really getting close to the end, the last two essays. We're reading today Truth and Politics, which is chapter 7, and we'll read that in two sessions. Next, and then after that, we will read the last essay, chapter 8, Conquest of Space. We'll have a week off, I think, and then we will start with The Life of the Mind. That was your choice. We did a poll and it came in first. I know we did this about 3 or 4 years ago. I will say this: there's a new edition of The Life of the Mind out, a part of the critical edition of Hannah Arendt. You can get it if you're interested on Amazon.de, the German Amazon.de. Or from the Wallerstein Press. If you want to use that edition, you can. I'm going to use that edition this time, or you can use the old edition, the Harcourt Brace edition that we used last time, and I'll probably refer to both. But there are some interesting changes in the new one, and I want to read through it. I haven't had a chance to do it yet, so I will use the new edition for those who want to follow along and order it in advance. It's just The Life of the Mind, published by this is the edition. It's what it looks like, and it's the Wallstein Verlag, and you can get it in the German on a German website. It's in English though, don't worry. The last thing I want to say as a quick intro and reminder is that we have a new tradition that we've done a few times now, where at the end of each book, we take questions that you have from the whole book, and I will spend an hour or so answering those questions on a podcast, and you can listen to the answers on the Reading Hannah Arendt with Roger Berkowitz podcast if you ever do that. If you'd like to ask a question about the book, Yana is sharing a link, which she just shared in the chat, and you can go to that link and type in a question, and I will answer questions about the whole book in a special of the podcast episode. So look forward to that. Okay. Now to the event you've all been waiting for, right? Whether or not Truth and Politics is Hannah Arendt's best essay, right, which it may be or not, it's certainly one of the most relevant for thinking about our current world. I mean, I would say the two most cited works of Hannah Arendt in the last 8 to 10 years have been The Origins of Totalitarianism and this essay, Truth and Politics. There's another essay called Lying in Politics, which is a companion essay to this one. But this one, I think, is probably the one that most people go to and have been concerned with, for obvious reasons. We are witnessing a complete breakdown of any confidence in public truth, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, and people are turning to Arendt. Well, I would like to say they're turning to Arendt to understand that, but I'm not sure that's true. I think most people are turning to Arendt for ammunition in order to support their side of the argument. And that's fine, I guess, but it's certainly not what Arendt was about, and it's not the reason she wrote this essay. we are going to try and read this essay in order to understand what Arendt is doing. And let me just say that in short, in brief, what Arendt is doing is trying to say that truth and politics don't go together. And what she's going to say is that for the most part, truth is impotent in politics. It has no ability to influence politics, or very little. And when politics wants to, it can always defeat truth. And yet, she's going to say that there are ways. She's going to say two things. One is, even though truth is impotent in politics, and even though truth will be defeated by politics, we can't live without truth in some way. We need truth. A world without truth, she says, would not be a human world. And so there's a limit to the amount of destruction that politics can do to truth. Because if politics goes too far and destroys too much truth, the very world that politics wants to govern will disappear. And so we have to understand the resources that truth has to fight back against politics. One of those resources is simply the limit that politics can't destroy truth too much, or it will destroy itself. And the second is that there are non-political institutions of truth-telling that politics, in the end, has to, in some sense, respect. It can kill some of them, but there are limits to them. And that will be the last chapter of the essay, last section of the essay, which we'll discuss next week. But in short, that's the argument, right? Truth is impotent in politics. Truth basically will be defeated by politics, but we need truth in order to live in a human world. And thus there are limits to the destruction that politics can do to truth. And what we need to do is develop non-political institutions, the arts, law, the sciences, academia, journalism, non-political institutions that preserve truth despite the fact that politics will usually destroy truth. That, of course, leads to the controversial claim that these non-political institutions are non-political. And obviously, since the 1960s and 70s, much of the effort of certain critiques of establishment institutions is to show that the law, the journalism, the arts, academia are all political and have been politicized. And Arendt is here going to argue that we have to, in some sense, preserve these outside political institutions, non-political institutions, as truth-telling non-political institutions, and they have to be preserved that way if we're going to preserve a human world. Okay, that's an overview of a very complicated, wonderful and beautiful essay. We're going to read the first three sections of it today, and then we'll continue next week. I'll start, though, by saying that there's a footnote right at the beginning of this essay, in which she says that this essay was caused, her words, right, by the so-called controversy over the Eichmann book that she wrote. She says that she writes this essay to clarify two issues which the controversy made manifest to her. The first is Is it always legitimate to tell the truth? Um, and while she doesn't per se answer that here in this essay, she does say it in numerous places. She thinks the answer is yes. She thinks that in the end, telling the truth, even if it causes pain, she realizes her book Eichmann in Jerusalem caused people pain. She realizes that many people were upset with her, but she thinks that it was right to tell the truth. And the second issue that the book and its controversy raised to her was that she needed to think through the amazing amount of lies told about, first, what she wrote, and secondly, what happened factually at the trial. And she says this essay is an attempt to come to grips with these two questions. Overall, she says that the essay serves as an example of what happens when we think between past and future about a highly topical subject. And if you recall the prologue to this book on the gap between past and future, what she says is that the essays in this book are all what she calls exercises in thinking, exercises at living in this gap, in this space where tradition has ended, and thus we no longer can rely on the moral and political truths of tradition, and we're in a battle and in this gap. And so this essay is an attempt to think about truth and politics. Take a topical subject, truth and politics, and think about it. And she thinks that this is an example of how to think in this way. And if that's, it's, the fact that this is the only essay where she reiterates that original claim, I think is indicative of how important she thinks this essay is. And I, as I've already said, I think it's clearly one of the most important essays she ever wrote. Okay. It's divided into 5 parts. We're going to try and get through parts 1 through 3 today. Part 1 begins with the famous and important truism, or commonplace, as she calls it, that truth and politics are on bad terms. I mean, this is in some sense obvious. We all know that politicians lie, but it goes much deeper than that. First of all, there may be good reasons for politicians to lie. You may have to lie and tell people that there's no danger at this moment, because if you tell them there's danger, more people will die. Well, okay, should you lie or should you tell the truth? It's an interesting question. It's a political question, but there's certainly good arguments for telling a lie. Not to mention the fact that if you want to change things, if you want to make the world better, however we define better, you're going to have to tell people lies. You're going to have to, she thinks that the idea that we are all equal is a lie, right? We're all different, but she thinks that the equality of men is one of the great political lies of modern history, and one that she takes great solace in many ways. But it's a lie, and she thinks that any great politician is going to have to lie greatly. And so truth and politics are on bad terms for many reasons. She then, it's still on this first paragraph, on this first page of the essay, she gets to what I take to be the fundamental question of this essay, which is that she says that truth is impotent. Truth has no power in the political realm. If someone tells the truth, it doesn't do much. In fact, if you tell the truth, you largely state what already most people agree, and so it has very little impact. But if you lie, you say what most people don't agree with, and it can, if it's successful, change the world. Lying has an impact, is powerful. Truth generally doesn't. And she says that while truth is impotent, politics and power are deceitful. And thus she says on this page, this first page, she asks the question, and I think this is the question of the essay, is it of the very essence of truth to be impotent and of the very essence of power to be deceitful, right? The Bible tells us the truth will set you free, right? And I think a lot of people today, I think most of my students and many of my friends fundamentally believe that. They say this to me, right? They say, if the media just told people the truth about global warming or about what Russia did or about who Trump is, then people would understand and we would do the right thing. The truth will set you free. But Arendt doesn't believe that, right? She just doesn't believe that. And what she asks is, but what if truth is powerless? What if it doesn't set you free? What if truth has little or no impact? And that's the question she raises, right? She says, is it of the very essence of truth to be impotent? If truth is impotent, if truth is powerless, then knowing the truth will have very little impact on politics. And so she says, facts and events are infinitely more fragile things than axioms, discoveries, and theories. Factual truths are fragile. They're not gonna survive power. She understands that facts can be disputed or negated and neutralized. And because facts and the truths founded upon those facts are contingent, they could be otherwise, right? It could be the case that, I'm wearing a weird blue shirt, but I could also be wearing a weird red shirt. And since it could be otherwise, right? If someone comes along and uses AI technology to put me in a red shirt and tells you, oh, he was really wearing red, eventually people will start to believe I was wearing red. And as a result, we can make facts taboo. We can have them denied, doubted, and destroyed. And on 227, right, 4 pages in, she says, the chances of factual truth surviving the onslaught of power are very slim indeed. It is always in danger, namely factual truths are always in danger of being maneuvered out of the world, and not only for a time, but potentially forever, right? I mean, the examples that she often uses of this are the USSR taking Trotsky out of all of its history books and all of its official correspondence and trying to disappear Trotsky from the world. If you've read 1984 by George Orwell, I mean, this is what, Big Brother tries to do. Facts and truths in dictatorships can be tabooed so that speaking of them will lead to punishment or worse. And in fully totalitarian regimes, right, facts can be outright erased. And this is one distinction between dictatorships and totalitarian government. Dictatorships can punish telling the truth, but they're not going to erase the truth. Totalitarian regimes aim to erase the truth. Now, whether they can or not is obviously, to some degree, a factual question. Arendt says there's no reason to think they can't. And yet, she comes to believe that at least in the 2 great totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, in Nazi Germany and Bolshevik Russia, that they were unsuccessful in doing so. And she changes her mind on this, by the way. So in 1951, when she writes The Origins of Totalitarianism, she says that there are holes of oblivion, and she calls them concentration camps. And she says concentration camps were experiments in full totalitarianism where you could taboo and erase facts. And yet by the time she writes Eichmann in Jerusalem in 1963, she sees that even the concentration camps, people survived and told the story, and we learned about them. And she concludes that there are no holes of oblivion. She changes her mind. Now, this is 8 years after that, she's writing this essay. It's clear that she still thinks it's possible that a totalitarian regime could fully erase facts, but it's very hard. We will return to this at the very end of the essay next week when we read section 5. And I'll just give you a preview on page 255. So in section 5, near the end of the essay, she writes, Truth, though powerless and always defeated in a head-on clash with the powers that be, right? So even though truth is impotent and can be defeated by power, nevertheless, truth possesses a strength of its own. Whatever those in power may contrive, they are unable to discover or invent a viable substitute for truth. The point she's making here is that while truth can be defeated by power, power needs truth. This is the limit I was talking about before. Persuasion and violence can destroy truth, but she says they cannot replace it. And so if you decide as a political figure to destroy truth through persuasion and violence, you may succeed, but you will also destroy your power because you can't have a human world without truth. And so in the end, in spite of the impotence of truth, we need truth. She says this on page 225, where having discussed these two Latin sayings, fiat justitia et pereat mundus, let justice be done even if the world perish, or fiat veritas et pereat mundus, let the truth be done or said even if the world would perish. And what she says is, in spite of Kant, who says the opposite, the first one is clearly wrong, that it's not better to do justice and let the word perish. It's better to let the world continue and let injustices continue. She thinks that injustices are not worth the destruction of the world. But she says the question is different with truth, because she thinks that if there's no truth, then there's no permanence and no perseverance in human existence. There's no common world. Then there's no human world, right? You could have a human world without justice because, sadly, injustice is part of humanity. But you can't, she thinks, have a human world without some truth. Without men willing to testify to what is and to say what is, we don't have a real world. And we lose the common world in which we come together. And so she thinks that truth is something that is absolutely necessary for humanity. She develops this a little bit through a discussion of the different kinds of conflict between truth and politics told by Plato, right? Plato says that truth tellers risk ridicule if their truths are consequential, and then death. So the philosopher comes out of the cave, comes back in, and tells the truth. If the truth he tells doesn't bother anyone, they just laugh at him. But if his truth he tells challenges the powers that be, they kill him. And obviously Socrates is a model for that. Hobbes says, such truth as opposeth no man's profit nor pleasure is to all man welcome. That's how he ends the Leviathan. You can tell the truth as long as it doesn't oppose anyone's profit or pleasure. But even mathematical truths, he says, would be undone if they countered the people in power. And so this leads to Arendt saying, okay, there are different kinds of truth. There's mathematical truth, there's scientific truth, there's philosophic truth. She categorizes all three of those as rational truths. And then there's political or factual truths, contingent truths. She says, I'm not going to ask the question of what is truth. I'm not going to do that. She accepts for her art, for the purpose of this essay, that they all could be truth. But she says, since we're interested in truth in its relation to politics, the kind of truth we're usually concerned with in politics are factual truths. And since power can erase factual truths, we need to explore this question of factual truth. And this leads us to section 2 of the essay. Section 2 of the essay is about, first of all, the victory of opinion over rational truth, and then the victory of opinion and politics over factual truths. And so she begins by telling what she calls a story of the conflict between politics and truth, which originally started as a conflict between rational truth and politics. You had, Plato says, a philosopher who was concerned with the truth of things, who sought the truth through a dialogue, through a discursive reasoning, and sought out what is, in the sense, a truth that I know as a singular philosopher, right? And the philosopher's truth may not be transferable to other people, but it's one that I can know on my own. Against the philosopher's truth was the citizen's truth. Well, or actually not truth, but the citizen who was concerned not with truth, but with opinion or rhetoric. And the citizen, of course, could then be swayed by demagoguery or rhetorical persuasion. In this conflict between rational truth and opinion, she says, it's obvious that opinion has won. Nobody in public life today cares whether God exists or not, right? I mean, you may, and that's great. I mean, people, I think it's actually really important for people to concern themselves with questions of, a spiritual center of the universe. But that's not a political question, right? And most politicians say with the American Constitution, you have freedom of religion. It doesn't really matter. Similarly, with philosophical truths, we don't much care whether what the philosopher determines is good or evil or bad. We care about what matters in politics and what individuals, philosopher, Martha Nussbaum can talk about cosmopolitanism all we want. But most of us are concerned with tribalism. And so the point is that philosophers who can make these determinations have lost, and what matters is opinion, not truth. But she says, if you move from the rational truths to the factual truths, it's a whole different ballgame, right? In the case of factual truth, she says, unlike religious or philosophical truths, factual truths that we don't like garner unprecedented hostility. This is on page 231, right? While today we witness a toleration of so many diverse opinions on religious and philosophical matters, right? People can be Buddhist. I mean, a great example is the current vice president, who converted from a sort of ill-defined Christianity to a strong Catholicism, and has made Catholicism a core part of his political as well as religious identity. And yet he's married to a practicing Hindu, right? Who also makes her Hinduism a part of her political and spiritual identity. The point is, we tolerate multiple diverse opinions on religious and philosophical matters. But on factual truth, right? If you think that the election was stolen, or if you think the election wasn't stolen, and we disagree with you, we greet you today with a greater hostility than ever before, right? Factual truths matter in a way that spiritual and philosophical truths do not. And so unwelcome facts, she said, are attacked. And the way they are most effectively attacked, she says, in a full totalitarian government, you can erase facts, right? We talked about that. You can taboo facts. But that's hard because we don't live in a full totalitarian government. At least right now, we don't even live in a dictatorship where you can punish people whose facts you disagree with. But she says there's a much easier way to attack facts, which is simply to turn them into an opinion, right? If you believe in global warming, all you have to say is, I don't know. That's an opinion. My opinion is that, the Earth's been warming for a long time. It cooled, it warmed, it cooled, it warmed. Well, okay, yeah, it's been going up now, but whether that's actually going to continue, we don't know. It's an opinion, not a fact. If you think racism or structural racism is a fact, you can say, no, it's an opinion. And here's the viewpoints on it, right? The point is, the easiest, most effective way for a non-totalitarian and non-dictatorial political figure to attack facts is to turn them into opinions. And when that happens, when facts are made unreliable, when they're turned into opinions, we lose faith in the factual world and in the common world, right? And it's much more effective than when you attack philosophic or religious opinions. Because if you attack someone's Christianity or someone's Judaism or someone's Islam, they may retreat to the private, but they still have their conviction, right? It can be preserved by a few. But factual truth has no transcendent safety, right? Facts, and here's the turn she makes in this section. And this is going to bother some of us, right? Facts are thus by their nature political. We think facts are not political, they're facts. And she says, no. Facts and opinions, she says, must be kept apart. But they are not antagonistic to each other. They belong to the same realm, right? This is on page 234. All of us have to struggle with this because it's true, right? Well, we want to make a distinction between facts and opinions, and doing so is absolutely essential. You can't do so honestly and effectively if you don't recognize that facts and opinions belong to the same realm. What does that mean? It means that facts, like opinions, depend on persuasion of many people. In the end, they depend on the majority, right? What makes a fact is that most people agree to it. Okay, well, what if most people stop believing a fact that, 2 + 2 is 4? Well, what she says is it can be negated. Maybe we'll come up with it again, and maybe some few will believe it, but it will cease to have its public impact. What if most people no longer believe the fact that what happened on January 6th was an attack on the rule of law? Well, that fact can be negated. It can be made into an opinion. And while we may want to say it's a fact, it's now an opinion. Now, Arendt here makes a subtle move. She says, look, this is not an argument against the existence of facts, right? She says it's not an argument against the existence of factual matter. It's not a justification for blurring the dividing line between fact and opinion and interpretation. She says we admit the right of opinion and interpretation, but not the right to rewrite the factual matter itself. So that seems to say, oh, now she's pulling back and she's saying there are facts that are not opinions. But then on 235, she says, and yet such a power monopoly to rewrite and challenge and taboo facts is far from being inconceivable. And it is not difficult to imagine what the fate of factual truth would be if power interests, national or social, had the last say in these matters. And this, she says, returns us to our original suspicion that it may be in the nature of the political realm to be at war with truth in all its forms, including factual truth. And even to tell the factual truth is anti-political, right? To say that this is a fact is an anti-political statement, because politics is about arguing over our opinions. And if you want to say that this is taken out of the realm of opinion and it's a fact, you're isolating it from politics. Thus, she's going to say at the beginning of part 3 that truth and claims of factual truth, or claims of all truth, but also claims of factual truth, are non-political and are despotic in the sense that they are opposed to politics. So she says, seen from the viewpoint of politics, truth has a despotic character. Montesquieu, right, very famously, and for Arendt very importantly, told us that only power can check power, right? Constitutions, bills of rights, but ultimately the multiplicity of powers is the only way to check power. And Arendt asks again this question: is truth impotent? Can truth outside of power or politics check power? And on the one hand, she wants to say, no, they can't. Power will win. On the other hand, she wants to say, factual truths have an infuriating stubbornness. This is on 236. It's hard to erase facts. I already read from page 255 where she says, if you destroy facts, there's a limit to how much you can destroy. This is a little bit confusing, but in a good way. It's nuanced. It's not confusing, I think I should say. What she's trying to say is facts and opinions go together. And yet we need facts. We need facts because facts are what establish a common world. Factual truths are anti-political, and thus they sort of are anti-democratic. And when politicians challenge factual truths, they're often speaking for the people. And yet, factual truths, as these opaque truths that we don't persuade people of, but we just tell them that they're truths, are also real, and we have to address them. The problem with factual truths, or one problem with factual truths, is they cannot be guaranteed, right? If I say to you, January 6th was an insurrection, and you say to me, no, January 6th was a legitimate protest, we can both bring witnesses and we can both bring testimony. There's no way to guarantee which one of us is right, right? Is that a factual question or an opinion question? It's a fact that this happened or this happened, that a person was killed, that windows were broken, that police officers were attacked. Those are facts. Whether it's an insurrection or not is an opinion. Now, it could also be a fact if the opinion is so strong and so widely held that it's taken to be for granted. And many of the facts that we think of facts of to be facts in our political world, that there's global warming caused by human actions, or that January 6th was an insurrection, or that Russia invaded Ukraine, are only facts insofar as people actually generally believe them in a non-political, acceptable way. But once they're challenged and turned into opinions, we have to be clear about which part of them are facts and which part of them are opinions. And Arendt says there's simply no way to verify factual truths. She says that on rational truths, I can sort of, there is some way I can act by example. So she gives the example of Socrates, who says, it is better to suffer wrong than do wrong. That's an ethical imperative, right? It's an ethical factual statement, but it's his imperative. It's his opinion. But she says it became true for much of Western morality because Socrates was willing to die for it. And because we, over the course of Western history, people looked at that act and saw Socrates' decision to die for his truth, that it's better to suffer wrong than do wrong, people began to accept it as true. But she says, if I get up there and say January 6th was an insurrection, and you get up there and say January 6th was a protest, and I burn myself alive to prove how true it was, and you burn yourself alive to prove how true it was, she says, that's not going to prove anything, right? The truth is, she says that if you are willing to die for a factual truth, it just means that you might have courage, you might have a moral, ethical conviction, but it doesn't actually convince me that your facts are right. And so on 244, she says, a teller of factual truth who stakes his life will not succeed in proving his factual truth. Why shouldn't a liar stick to his lies with great courage? And so in these first three sections of this essay, just to pull us together, we've talked about how truth is impotent, right? And why that matters. And the question is, if truth is impotent in politics, does truth matter? Yes, she says truth matters. We need truth, right? We can't have a world without truth. Okay. But then the problem is that truth we're concerned with is factual truth, right? And factual truth is easy to destroy, or at least, if not destroy it, render ineffective by turning it into an opinion. And then the problem then is that once factual truths can be turned into an opinion, factual truths seek to be a check on power. Truth is seen as anti-political, and we are left in a situation in which truth has very little power, or seemingly almost no power, in politics. Section 4 is going to talk about how this often can lead to cynicism, and section 5 is going to talk about the way we can bring back truth in non-political institutions. But we'll get there next week. So I'm going to stop there for now. And I think there's probably a huge amount for us to talk about, I hope. This is, like I said, one of the most important essays Arendt wrote, and certainly today one of the most relevant. It's not one that provides easy answers. It's not one that I think offers one side solace versus the other side, but it is an attempt to think in the gap between past and future about very difficult questions. Look forward to discussion. As always, you can engage in the chat. Please be civil and talk to each other, especially on these issues, with respect. You can disagree with each other's ideas, but please don't attack the person. You can also raise your hands and on the reactions button down at the bottom of the Zoom button, and we will have our conversation. Okay, look forward to it. Juliana, you're first.
Hi, Roger. Thank you so much. I have a question because I always get confused with the stages of opinion in Arendt's thinking. From what you said here so far, I mean, it's a bit ambiguous, isn't it? There's a positive and a negative aspect to opinion. We need opinions in the political realm. Opinions can be informed by factual truths, but at the same time, opinions can distort factual truths. So, I mean, what came across to me while listening to you was the negative aspect of it, like the fact that opinions can distort factual truth and make the factual truth lose its power. But what is a more positive view of opinion, according to Arendt? I hope my question makes sense.
Well, positive view of opinion or facts?
Opinion. I mean, we need opinions too, right? So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, thank you, Juliana. It's a great question. I mean, I didn't focus on it so much because we're interested in truth here. And truth is the opposite of opinion. But for her, opinion is the core of politics, right? She has some great discussions in these pages about James Madison, but also about Kant and others. And for her, the glory of politics is that there is no truth, and that we have to figure out a way to live together amidst our different opinions. And so opinions are for her absolutely essential for politics. The problem is, and you sort of alluded to it, is that you can't have opinions without facts, right? She says on page 234 in my edition, right? Facts and opinions, though they must be kept apart, are not antagonistic to each other. They belong to the same realm. Facts inform opinions, and opinions inspired by different interests and passions can differ widely and still be legitimate as long as they respect factual truths. Freedom of opinion is a farce unless factual information is guaranteed and the facts themselves are not in dispute. In other words, factual truth transforms political thought. Factual truth informs political thought, just as rational truth informs philosophical speculation. So there's a few things here. One is opinions are great, right? And we can have different opinions and different interests. And that's politics, and that's the beauty of human life. But you can't have opinions without some facts. You need some facts. And so then someone says, oh, well, so she believes in facts, and she does believe in facts. She absolutely does believe in facts. I don't want anyone to say Berkowitz says she doesn't believe in facts. She does. But she thinks that many of us think that our opinions are facts when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know, it's just an easy example that I often use, right? Global warming or climate change. There are a lot of people in my world, at least, right, say, you know, global warming and climate change are a fact. That's just not true, right? It is a fact that the earth is warming. It is a fact that some percentage of that warming seems to be due to human activities, right? But it's also a fact that the earth has warmed and cooled and warmed and cooled many times over the centuries and the millennia. And it's not a fact that, you know, all of this climate change is related to human doings. And it's not a fact what's going to happen. These are based on models and on hypotheticals, and things could change. Those are opinions. And you absolutely need facts, but it's also imperative that we respect the difference between fact and opinion. And too often, so many of our arguments today are when people say, this is a fact, when what they mean is, well, I've looked at the facts, and based on those facts, this is my opinion. And that confusion is one of the many things that I think Arendt's essay forces us to grapple with.
Thank you.
Yep, Harold.
Thank you, Roger. Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. So at the end of World War II, General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, determined that at some point in the future, people would deny the Holocaust. And so he gathered a group of journalists and photographers and went to the camps, and specifically in his speech said, okay, I believe that in the future people will try to deny this, but they can't deny it because now I'm here and there's a picture of me here and there's a story written. I just wanted to point that out.
No, it's a great point. And he's obviously been proven right? There are plenty of people who continue to try and deny the Holocaust. And what's often interesting, I don't want to say, if you read some of these people and you watch the movies they make, they use those photographs and they use those journalistic movies that were made when Eisenhower brought the journalists in, and they try and take the facts and give them a different opinion and spin.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, how persuasive they can be to some people, right? That's the same thing with, just take an example, 9/11, right? I mean, the number of people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job because of, engineers and scientists and propagandists who've sat there and looked at all these facts and made these factual arguments that 9/11 had to be an inside job. And there have been documentaries and books and movies about it, right? The point is that that's an opinion. And what they are trying to do with their opinion is turn the opinion, which is widely considered a factual opinion, that 9/11 was the act of brutal terrorists from Afghanistan led by Osama bin Laden, into an opinion. I don't think they've succeeded there, right? In that case, that opinion, even though it's an opinion, is believed by enough people that it has the imprimatur of a social fact or a political fact. 2.5 years ago, most of us believed that the idea that what happened on January 6th was an attack on legal democratic government was a social and political fact. It's largely been rendered into an opinion, unfortunately, in my view. I mean, today. That the way that has happened has been extraordinary. We've seen it, in our midst. I mean, right in front of me here is the January 6th report, which I taught 2 years ago, which is the full account of how this happened. Yet it's been rendered into something else. How did they do it? One, by taking the facts and giving them a different spin, and two, by taking some actual facts and making them up. And what Arendt says is, you have a right to your opinion based on real facts, but you don't have a right to make up the facts. And that's the problem, though, is it's very hard. Who gets to determine what a fact is? That's why facts are so contingent, right? Is it a fact that Antifa elements were involved in the January 6th uprising? I've seen no evidence, no reliable evidence. And yet, I don't know, some 20, 30, 40% of the country might believe that. And it's very hard for truth to win out over power in that way. And that's what Arendt is talking about. And yet she says, the battle has to be fought on facts, not on opinions. I think that's the lesson she's trying to teach us, that if we're going to fight to preserve truth, we have to be clear that we're fighting to preserve the actual factual matter, not the opinions we want from it. And so on the January 6th issue, don't claim that an insurrection is a fact. It's an opinion, but fight on the factual level. Now, I don't know if that's an effective strategy, right? She's not saying it's effective or not, but that's how she's making that distinction. Vigdis.
Yeah, I think in line with what you said, Noah, I just want to point to at the bottom of page 238, where she says there, because I think that is both important and also some illuminating. It is true that in retrospect, that is in historical perspective, every sequence of events look as though it could not have happened otherwise. But this is an optical, or rather an existential illusion. And she says, nothing could ever happen if reality did not kill, by definition, all the other potentialities originally inherent in any given situation. I think it's a lovely formulation. The trouble is that liars can bring back those potentialities. So there comes the lie. And I think just one sentence from Human Condition that I also think is illuminating when it comes to the relation between facts and opinions, because she says, only where things can be seen by many in a variety of aspects without changing their identity, so that those who are gathered around them now they see sameness in utter diversity, can worldly reality truly and reliably appear? And that is what I think that's what you talked about now when you come to the 6th of January to see what happened, to see the facts there, see the broken windows and all these things, but and realize we have to stick to those things. And today, what I see as a huge problem in this is actually that we live in a world with mediated reality. We don't see this with our own eyes. We don't perceive the facts mostly. We see them through media. And we know this is becoming even worse when we have artificial intelligence. So I think what we face today is incredibly difficult to sort out. Is this a kind of mediated fact? Is it a lie? Is it just made up? How do we make the distinction, and how do we actually find what is facts here and what is lies and what is just made up?
Yeah. I think that's the hardest challenge for us today, right? How do we make these distinctions? I mean, it's still important to argue over opinions, right? I mean, I think it's still important to argue over whether January 6th was an insurrection or a protest. It's a good argument to have. You just can't call it a fact when large number of percentage of the people don't believe it's a fact. You have to call it opinion and then marshal facts in your argument. But what happens when the other side marshals facts? Well, some of their facts, you have to argue with them. But some of their facts, if their facts are lies, or if they think your facts are lies, that's where the problem hits, because then there's no mediator. No one's there to say, well, actually, this is the fact, right? And so, you see the recourse that people have made. On one side, on the sort of more democratic side, if you let me use those terms, they say, well, has any court of law found evidence that there was no that there was a violation of the election? And they know the answer is no. And the other side says, well, we don't trust the courts of law, right? The courts of law have become biased. We don't trust the legal profession and the legal world. We think it's been weaponized, right? And that's the battle that you're seeing. So if you don't trust the authorities, if you don't trust the non-political fact tellers, the legal system, the journalists, the academics, the scientists, the artists, to be non-political, then there's no way to determine the facts, which is why Arendt makes the somewhat controversial today claim that we have to depoliticize these realms. We have to depoliticize the realm of law, depoliticize the realm of academia, depoliticize the realm of art, depoliticize the realm of journalism. She is going to, in the end, her argument is the only way to preserve facts and thus to preserve the possibility of opinion based on facts and thus a common world is to have non-political realms. And part of what's happened in the last 70 or 80 years is there's been an attack on the non-political realms, originally, I think, from the left, right? In which the left said these realms were politicized by their whiteness, their masculinity, their wealth, etc. And that argument on the left largely won, and many of these realms became more reflective of a different political truth. And now what you're seeing, right, is a reaction on the right. And they're saying these realms have become politicized. We don't trust them. All of that, I think, is on both sides has been true. And now the question is there a way to reinvigorate the authority of these non-political realms? Is there a way to reinvigorate their non-political or disinterested or impartial nature? And And I'm not sure what the answer is to that. Martin Gurry, a friend of mine who's spoken at the RN Center, and I've done a first podcast on the RN Center podcast with Martin Gurry. His book, The Revolt of the Public, basically makes the argument that in the age of the internet, where everybody can find their own facts and everyone can show the facts that were left out of any official and any authoritative viewpoint, there's simply no possibility anymore of creating an authoritative account of the facts. And if that's true, and Martin Gurry is right, I don't see a way out of this from an Arendtian perspective. I think Martin Gurry is on to something really important, and he's made a very powerful argument. But as Arendt tells us, there's always the possibility of new ideas and new actions and new freedoms emerging that create a new impartial or realm, to use the example here, or a new realm of authority. I don't know if it will come or when it will come or how it will come. But in a way, what I think Arendt teaches me is we have to be open to the coming of such a new authority. Zara.
Hello.
Zara.
You partially alluded to what I'm going to ask, but I need further elaboration anyway. So I'm going to ask, well, based on what you described, Arendt is trying to say how opinions are, like facts are turned into opinions, and that kind of takes their power. What I've experienced, and even on a larger scale, is a problem of turning opinions into facts. And you also alluded to that. And it's that when, and that's for me, it's a textbook image of someone who's affected by propaganda, like someone who's incapable of seeing what their interpretation of the world is just a version and not the only version. And based on that strong opinion, they take actions that have consequences for others. And having witnessed that, I've always seen, like, because I witnessed the consequence. And for me, it was always like the right way would be to be cautious about what I believe, what everyone else believes, and kind of linked considering my view as an opinion with being humble.
Yeah.
And because of, and that kind of can like lead to sort of relativity. And then it would be the whole situation that Arendt is describing. I'm still incapable of seeing how I can get a practical, way out of this. Like, because like it's both ways are having like serious consequences that can damage others. And specifically, like all of these ways that we discussed, they are not helping. Like as other people mentioned, you can beat data enough and you can get anything out of it. You have a large infinite amount of information that you can cherry pick and garnish your opinion and say, here is my factual worldview. And it's just, it's worth nothing. And I kind of struggle to see a practical way to kind of both consider truth and still have political action.
Zara, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Can I ask, I mean, just because I'm interested, do you have a particular example in mind of turning opinion into fact through propaganda, just so I know where you're coming from?
Yeah, I used to, as a teenager, I used to ask my previous generation, my father, his friends, all of that, why did you decide to do that action? Like for us, that would be a revolution, but it can be generalized in other countries as well. Like this decision that you made in that era is affecting me right now. And the answer is always like, well, you don't know how it was then. Like they're trying to say how the situation was like different. And well, all I'm hearing is that they were incapable of, like they had an explanation for how things worked, and then they made decisions.
Yeah.
And after like decades after that, when just witnessing the consequences, they were like, oh, well, there were other ways we could interpret all this, and we didn't.
Yeah.
and it's too late now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, there's tons of examples of opinions turned into facts, right? And to some degree, we can't live without them, right? You know, if all we could do was agree on is say we have to protect the facts, but everyone could have different opinions. I mean, it would be very hard to have any kind of public life, right? You know, here's an example. We live in a democracy. That's an opinion turned into a fact. It begs so many questions. What is a democracy? You know, to what extent do the people really rule in this country, et cetera, et cetera. Or, you know, I mean, that's just one many. You can give dozens or hundreds of examples. And yet, if you don't believe to some degree that the country is a democracy, it's going to fall apart or it's going to turn into something else. And so we do need, there are no group of people, no political group of people can live together without some truths that are not just bare facts, but are also opinions that hold them together. Arendt at the end of this book is going to call that the ground we stand on in the sky above us. At the end of this essay. And she's going to say that, you know, there are truths that we need that are not just bare facts, but we need to all you know, if we're gonna share the earth we live on in the sky above us, we're gonna have to share those opinions. And so, you know, we're always struck with this question of when do we give up, you know, when does an opinion that we take as fact have to, in a sense, be rescinded, right? So the idea that we live in a democracy, a good one. And yet, you know, for so many people, it just doesn't ring true, right? We live in a technocracy to some people. We live in a oligarchy to other people, or an aristocracy to some. And at some point, you know, do we keep saying we live in a democracy, or do we start to move away from that fact to more lower order facts, right? That we live in a country where we do have elections and there's an electoral college. And it turns out that about 800,000 or 900,000 people in 7 states actually decide who the president of this country is going to be. And that's determined by money and all sorts of other things. And even when the president gets elected, there's an entire technocracy and bureaucracy that prevents them from implementing the policies they want to implement. I mean, there's all sorts of questions that we can raise about that. And we may have to admit that most people don't believe we live in a democracy and start talking more factually in order to build a new consensus, or not. I mean, I'm just saying those are the kind of questions that I think you're raising, at least as I understand it, Zara. It raises the question of humility, of relativity, as you said. And yet and it may mean that we have to step back in order to move forward again, right? We mean step back from the claim we live in a democracy in order to reinvigorate the idea that we live in a democracy or a Republican form of government, small r Republican, or something else. That's how I would try and understand that. Does that help at all? I think I understood your question, but I hope so.
It does. It's one aspect. I was also thinking about the other solution that we had for this. Like it was the whole discourse against discrimination. That also was maybe another example that might clarify what I'm saying. Like about humbleness means that, okay, we mistreated Black people, women for so long, and it has led to the situation. And now we're going to step back, as you said, and we're going to be like, as a white man, I would be humble and would listen more. And like we're living in a moment that's taken a turn, that's kind of backfiring, and I don't, it's kind of confusing that, okay, how can I now use facts and all of facts and opinions just being interchanged? And what's worrisome in one of your, like when you were explaining to one of other participants, is that when, okay, a potential solution would be to try to depoliticize these institutions. whereas other philosophers has discussed that these institutions are intrinsically political. They have like from day one, it's in their DNA. And so my worry would be that depoliticizing them would actually ignoring their political side instead of actually trying to make them objective.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move on, but it's a great point. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to get everyone in. Stephen.
Thanks. I think Arendt may be misleading us a little bit, or we may be misleading ourselves into too many strict bifurcations. For instance, between a fact and an opinion. If you are involved in, say, a jury trial of medical negligence, you're going to have allegations of facts, and you're going to have experts, presumably qualified before the court, that will come in and give an opinion. And it seems to me these opinions and the way that jury instructions, at least the ones I'm acquainted with, characterize these are, might be said to be conclusions of fact. And so that what we have are facts which differ in degrees of probability, from probable cause to preponderance of the evidence, clear and convincing evidence, beyond reasonable doubt. Our legal system grades all these, and some things somebody says a fact, I don't care. I don't give a darn. Other things we may care deeply, and the consequences differ. And the same with opinions. It seems to me opinions are conclusions about facts that may lead to action. The most important thing in a jury trial, for instance, a criminal jury trial, if someone is accused of false campaign finance reporting, a jury has to form an opinion, reach a conclusion as to whether or not the state has proved that set of facts beyond reasonable doubt. And so we have all these gradations, and I don't know how that works in public. But in terms of our own thinking, especially, this group and trying to wrestle with Arendt on this, I think she lacks that shading. It would be helpful to think in those terms, because it strikes me that she's just bifurcating fact and opinion too starkly in a way that doesn't work, and that your whole argument seems to be pointing out. Is America a democracy? Well, is that a fact or an opinion? It's kind of flip side of the same coin, right? The same coin is the actuality, and whether we look at it as a fact or an opinion depends on all these other factors: the consequence, the supporting evidence, etc.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, I think looking at expert witnesses and jury trials is a great example. A jury is supposed to hear the facts. The judge is supposed to tell them the law, and the jury is supposed to decide the facts. But then they're supposed to do one other thing, right? Which is to decide if how the facts fit under the law. That's a judgment.
Yes.
And they're supposed to issue what's called a verdict, speaking of the truth. But there's no rule for making those judgments, or as Kant would say, there's no rule for the interpretation of rules. And so in the end, the jury has to make a judgment, and they have to come to that. What is the judgment based on? Well, it's based on facts that they've heard and their attempt to decide which facts are true. You said that experts can be brought in, right?
Yes.
What's an expert? I mean, this is one of the,
Right.
I teach a course on the crisis of experts, and one of the most fascinating sections of the course is the law of expert testimony. What is an expert? I mean, who is an expert? And the judges have an extremely hard time figuring out, is an expert someone who has credentials? Is an expert someone who's experienced in the matter? Is an expert someone who has been, as one person, I think Mr. Koppel says, An expert is simply anyone who's been paid to give their opinion on a matter. At that point, experts are pretty broad. And so, it comes down to the question of, in the matter of factual truths, where is the authority? You say that the distinction in fact and opinion lacks shading. Okay. I mean, I won't disagree with you. I think it's complicated, but I'm not sure that, I'm not sure how one shades it. I mean, there are facts and there are opinions, and they get confused, and they're more like the colors of a rainbow that bleed into each other than strict distinctions. I fundamentally agree with you, but that's the problem that she's addressing. I think it's a real problem. I don't think it's a fake problem.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not suggesting it's at all. It's a fake problem, but I'm only suggesting that she draws this distinction, which for pedagogical purposes may be more useful than it is for practical purposes, because you're exactly right. For instance, in the use of experts, what qualifies as an expert is, in each trial, is ultimately what that particular trial judge decides ought to qualify as an expert, that this person can give testimony that will actually aid a jury in coming to a judgment, a verdict. That is supportable.
All I would say, Stephen, and look, you're right that these are unshaded, strict distinctions. And what we realize, and when we read it, and what she realizes, is they're much more complicated than that.
Mhm.
The benefit of Arendt and her problem is that she writes in English, in the sense that she doesn't write in jargon, right?
Sure.
She
Sure.
uses English words, fact and opinion, that we all use. And part of what she's doing is showing how confused these things are. And we could become an analytic philosopher and make 15 different distinctions and use P, Q, R, X, and make these distinctions, and maybe draw some, the shading you're asking for. And it would be very useful. And I'd like to read that analytic philosopher who does that, but it would be very hard for most of us to understand what they're saying. I'm with you. It's complicated. These distinctions fall apart, and yet that's her point. And I think it's helpful. I think she's making an important point, but
Well,
I hear your point.
I agree. One point, and that is, no. Let's not bring in analytic philosophers. But I will suggest that jury instructions have to grapple with this, and they do a pretty good job. I
Jury
think.
Instructions have the benefit of being issued by a judge who has the authority. There's no one.
That's right. That's right.
No
It's a
one who has
very
the
limited
authority in this argument. I mean, that's the problem.
Right. But I'm just
Let me move on,
as a
because I
tool.
got like
Sure.
5 hands up in 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and get through some of these. Hannah, let's try and keep the questions short, because I don't have a lot of time and I see there's a lot of questions.
Hi. Well, just to sort of respond to Stephen, which I kind of agree. I mean, we teach, that students that facts are documented occurrences that, have been verified independently. So when you say Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, you look for enough documentation, and then by common consent, that is a fact. But I was thinking of people saying something like, this building is 600 feet tall, and somebody says that's false, the ground has shifted, it's down further, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, facts are obviously very contentious things. However, when we get to the point where somebody says Abraham Lincoln wasn't the 16th president, as with maybe the Holocaust itself, we're really in trouble. And I think AI is going to do nothing but further the problem horrendously. The reason I raised my hand is simply to say that what I've witnessed among myself and people I don't agree with, and people I do agree with, about Elon Musk's raising his hand, and did he do the Nazi salute or didn't he do the Nazi salute? And it's just so tiresome, illustrative to watch each side be absolutely adamant that their opinion is utterly factual. And I think it's the most, perfect example of fact and opinion in people's minds converging. Because, when I said to a friend, I think he's on the Asperger, thing, and I think he slammed his heart first, and then his hand went out, and it was an over an exuberant gesture of excitement and love for the audience, and the other person said, "Bullshit."
Yeah.
It was a complete obvious thing, and Colbert said it was. It's like, okay, well, now it's cool.
Yeah,
There-
Hannah,
I just
I
had to
like
bring that
Hannah,
up.
I like that question for so many reasons. First of all, the example of the whatever we was the hand on the heart and going in that direction, is one that there's no right answer to.
It will
Like,
never be resolved, so drop it.
and yet people have such strong feelings for it. I mean, I was at dinner last night, and of course it's this. No, of course it's that. And great AI. What I really like, ask AI. Was it a AI will tell you. Well, it depends on content. I mean, AI can't answer these questions. But I think you're absolutely right that what AI can do is create videos that alter the way he did it slightly, and this way and that way, and create incredible doubt. And the real danger of AI, which is the real danger of lying in politics, and that's what we're going to get to in sections 4 and 5 for next week, which is I think all of this is fascinating, but the core of her arguments are in sections 4 and 5, which we're going to get to next week. Is that it can make us doubt all facts,
Exactly.
make us lose any capacity to make any kind of factual claims. At that point, it's very hard to build opinions or to live in a common world, and that's the real danger that we are moving towards. And
Can I just ask you, that writer you mentioned, Gory or somebody, could you repeat that so I could look it up?
yeah, Martin Gurri, Gurri. You can go back, and if you go to the Hunter Rent podcast, the first episode of the Hunter Rent Center Bias is me interviewing him about his book. He also spoke at the Hunter Rent Center conference in 2016. He's
What
become,
article are you talking about so I could look it up?
it's called The Revolt of the Public. It's a book.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. Bernie, you're up. And again, try and keep them short. I know this is hard.
Wasn't I in line, Roger?
What?
Wasn't I in line?
I don't know who's speaking.
David Lionel.
Oh, I didn't see your hand up. Did you drop your hand?
I didn't drop my hand, Roger. I had it up.
You were in line, but I didn't see you. But okay, now I see you. Can David, go ahead quickly.
All right. I noticed quickly, we can't really have the dialogues with the time. But what I want to emphasize, I think this is really brilliant and helpful that she wrote this 60 years ago. And we're living this out so totally right at this moment. But the key part is this, what we just went through with the election was the Democrats putting out facts, what they thought were facts, and Trump putting out interpretation, opinion, 100%, and making it up. He keeps repeating that Nancy Pelosi refused 10,000 National Guard troops to protect against January 6th. Totally made up, false, not true. He kept the National Guard guys from coming there, is why that whole happened. But the January 6th committee video, many of us watched that. But the truth is, maybe only about 20% of the voters watched that. And the other Republicans had already been completely insulated against even watching that. So we were all persuaded by that interpretation of the facts, very well done, but they didn't see it. And that's the key fact. Yeah. Distribution of the facts. Hold on.
And how
I answer what we are looking for, but very fast. When we distribute facts universally so that people see it, like they saw Elon Musk do whatever it is he did, everybody saw that. But the alternatives to that, interpretations, yeah, but we don't see it. Alternative vision We have to show this alternative vision with some detailed pictures to show that people what to do. And cutting to the chase, the Sustainable Development Goals is actually agreed on, is what all the nation states have agreed to do that. And so we don't have to invent that particular vision of the future. What humanity, all of us can work for, is completely nonpartisan and not American versus everything else. Anyway, so that's the gist. When we do our own TV that's sponsored and we put it out so everybody sees it, then everything will change and we can actually get the world we want. And until we do that, we can't and won't.
I hear you, David, and I think you feel that way, and I probably agree with you. Then there's the other people who say, well, why haven't you watched Tucker Carlson's special? And he has all his facts. And
I'm not on. We're not on. He's there. You can watch him, but you don't know that you can watch whoever it is, Tom Hartman, Amy Goodman, Free Speech TV. I know them all. And
the problem is there's a lot of different opinions out there. They're all doing their facts the same in their own way. Let me move on just so Bernie, you had been up, and then Shadi.
Yes, I thank you for giving us the name. But that was one of the things I was going to ask, and I got that down from the last question. I don't know if you ever were a practicing litigator yourself, but I did it for 17 years, and that certainly confirms that the legal system is just another arena of politics. It has a very prescribed set of rules by which you play the game of turning an opinion into a fact. And, even with all my disagreements with it, it's still, compared to other arenas, a pretty good place to go and create a system to actually find facts.
Bernie, let's talk about this next week when she writes about the legal system in section 5. Is that all right?
Fair enough.
Okay. Let me try and get to one or two more. Shadi, you're up next.
Hi. I just want to see what you're feeling, or I already said it. What you think about how I kind of felt about these three passages is it talks about a lot of truth and fact and rational truth. What I saw in all of this is lack of feelings, how people felt. It calls it politics, facts being affected by the politics. What we have experienced is there are truths, there's things that happened, but there are how people feel about it. People felt unheard, people felt not interested, people felt like not being included. And it's hard to regulate those feelings when there's a lot of things that is out of control, that is not really truth that is affecting people's feelings. Yeah. It's a ton of things in the social media and the media and out there that affects people's feeling. And no matter how much you make that facts, that economy, that inflation, whatever, matter how much you explain people what was really going on, they go by the way they feel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Shadi. And, this is one of those places where, Arendt doesn't talk about feelings so much. In fact, if you look on page 237, she explicitly says this, right? She says, political thought is representative. I form an opinion by considering a given issue from different viewpoints. She goes on and she says, this is a question of neither empathy, as though I tried to be or to feel like somebody else, nor of counting noses and joining a majority, but of being and thinking in my own identity where I actually am not. She wants to say that politics is about thinking, what she calls enlarged thinking, thinking from the perspective of as many different people as possible, not feeling from them. And this is her bias and her claim about what politics is, because she wants to think that politics is an activity of thinking beings. There's of course a counter to that, right? which is that that's just not true. Over time, what we've shown in history is that politics is an irrational, demagogic, rhetorical, feeling-based activity. And one can make that argument. And if that's your belief, then it's very hard to be someone who believes in self-government, because at that point, self-government is always going to be irrational and not thoughtful. Arendt is a fundamental believer in the rationality and thoughtfulness of human beings, and thus in the possibility of self-government. And that's just, unfortunately or not, her viewpoint. But you're absolutely right that she may be wrong. Anne Marie, we're sort of over time. Can I give you 30 seconds to just state a question or a point, and then I'm gonna move on? Or do you want to wait till next week?
Yeah, would you give me 30 seconds? I'll take it.
Okay.
I think it's interesting instead of, Barry, can you possibly meet that? I'm so sorry, we have some interference here. I think it's interesting instead of truth to go back to where I found myself going back to was the concept of history and the question of reality. And so the situation seems to me even more dire than the way we were thinking about it today. For instance, on page 87 on my copy of this of Between Past and Future, I'm not sure who decided or what order these essays were to appear. But this is one of the most interesting things of all, because what she tries to do on page 87 in my copy at any rate is to talk about a theory of theories. This means quite literally, she writes, that everything is possible, not only in the realm of ideas, but in the field of reality itself. She talks about her work on totalitarian phenomena. The totalitarian systems tend to demonstrate that action can be based on any hypothesis, and that in the course of consistently guided action, the particular hypothesis will become true, will become actual, factual reality. Not to sound too much like the Berenstain Bears here, actual, factual reality. The assumption which underlies consistent action could be as mad as it pleases. It will always end in producing facts which are then quote unquote objectively true. And she goes on and on about this. Isn't the situation far worse than this chapter, Truth in Politics, could even begin to even suggest that we could somehow decide on what are the facts here versus myths, and all those books, Myths versus Facts, and felt reality, and going back to people like Suzanne Langer, Thinking, Feeling, and
Marie, I'm gonna have to cut us.
I
I'm gonna have to cut us off, but I mean,
horrified, to put it mildly.
it's a good question, and we'll keep going with it. All right. I appreciate your input on it though, and it's scary to think that it's even worse. But yes, thank you all very much. I really encourage you it's not a lot of pages for next week, but it's profound stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and we'll see you next week. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Sophie.
Thank you,
Ciao.